Okay, I'm going to take you on an adventure around the world, and we're going to see clear evidence of an ancient series of cataclysms that happened in deep antiquity prior to the time that civilization is supposed to have existed, and you'll see that lost ancient high technology and very advanced civilizations were on this planet 12,000 plus years ago. So we're going to study sites of a megalithic nature in Peru and Bolivia, also in Egypt, even more evidence in Peru and Bolivia, even more evidence in Egypt, and also Mexico, and specific sites such as Pumapunku and Tiwanaku in Bolivia, and Baalbek in Lebanon. So this location is called Machu Picchu, located in the high Andes of Peru. And what you can see in the photograph is the stonework in the lower half is superior to the work in the upper half. Now, some people would say, well, the lower half work was the foundation, therefore it had to be stronger than the upper stonework. However, look at this. This is also at Machu Picchu, and this wall was never restored in modern times, was unknown to the Spanish conquistadors, and so this is from the Inca time frame, up to around 1535 AD. And you can see that the upper work is more or less rubble compared to the megalithic work below. So what you're seeing evidence of is that the Inca found the ancient site of Machu Picchu and they rebuilt it. The mystery is, who were those that came first and did the original megalithic construction? And we have legends from around the world, not simply from the Bible, but more than 200 indigenous cultures that talk about an ancient flood, whereby their world, whether it was a continent or simply an island, went through a flood stage where the ocean level rose and those that lived there had to flee. So we're getting more and more scientific evidence that something came into our solar system around 12,000 years ago and wreaked havoc. It quite possibly created what's called the asteroid belt. It might have turned Saturn or Uranus on its side. It may be the reason why Venus turns or rotates backwards and why our planet is at a tilt of 23.5 degrees. Because in a perfect universe, all of the planets should be perfectly vertical and moving in harmony with each other. So this man was called Plato, and he wrote an account based on much earlier accounts and even much earlier accounts that there was a landmass that existed called Atlantis, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and that this landmass disappeared approximately 12,000 years ago. His, of course, was not a first-hand account. The sources go back to ancient Egypt. But there could be some actual truth to the story and legend of Atlantis. Also, about 12,000 years ago, you had the die-off of what are called the megafauna of North America. Millions of giant animals very rapidly disappeared. And there's no environmental shift or climate change shift or whatever that can explain such a rapid decimation of the woolly mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, etc. However, in Siberia, thousands, if not millions, of In Siberia, thousands, if not millions, of woolly mammoths have been found flash frozen with food still in their mouths. And climate change can't explain that. But maybe something happened to the orientation of our planet. Possibly one day it was vertical, and then the next day it was tilted by 23 degrees. So the mammoths, etc., could have moved from a temperate climate to Arctic almost instantaneously. Because again, why is our planet at a 23-degree tilt, or more specifically 23.5 degrees? Why is it not vertical? It may have been struck by an enormous force that caused it to go from this to that. Conventional academics say that it was the Native American people who wiped out all of these megafauna somewhere around 12,000 years ago, simply by hunting them. But there were millions of them, and probably only thousands of these native people. So that is not a logical answer. However, in the 1950s, a book was written called Cataclysm, Compelling Evidence of a Cosmic Catastrophe in 9500 BC, which is 11,500 years ago. But let's just round the whole thing off to 12,000 to make it simpler. So according to them, a comet or pieces of a comet struck the planet and wreaked havoc, wiped out the megafauna, changed the environment of the entire planet, because you have, again, movement from perfectly vertical to 23.5 degrees. So that means going from tropical suddenly to temperate, temperate suddenly to Arctic, etc. That would have wiped out almost all plant and animal life and human life on the Earth. And so their work was then followed up by Barbara Hahn Clow, and her book was originally called Catastrophobia. And in it, she states that 12,000 years ago, a series of cataclysmic events happened. Most of the human population died out, and those that survived had to find refuge in recesses, as in caves. So according to her, this is the caveman period, from about 12,000 years ago until about 6,000 years ago, when we have the rise of civilization. So she believes that the rise of civilization such as Sumeria, the Indus Valley, Egypt, etc., was a renaissance. It was not the first evolvement of high civilization, but a renewal of humanity. And then we have Dr. Paul Laviolette, who's an American physicist. And according to his research, the center of our galaxy is not a black hole, but a pulsar. And every 13,000 years, or precessional cycle, half of a precession, that the center of our galaxy fills up with energy, and because it's a pulsar, it then releases the energy. So, this energy, including gamma rays, etc., spread across the galactic plane, entered our solar system, created the asteroid belt, went through the sun, and shot solar plasma straight at our planet. And so you see that these theories from different sources are starting to overlap. And his theory is called the galactic superwave. Again, once every approximately 13,000 years. And the work of geologist Robert Schoch. Now he emphasizes the solar plasma theory. It's not that the solar plasma struck all over the Earth, but very specific random locations. We're going to see evidence that his theory makes a lot of sense. So when we take all of those theories and put them together, we come up with my book, Aftershock, which looks at, I think, the most compelling aspects of those different theories and puts them together in a cohesive manner. And so according to Schoch, he believes that the end of the last ice age, which was about 12,000 years ago, was incredibly dramatic, and that the solar plasma caused a mass, especially of the northern ice sheet, as in the North Pole, to not simply melt, but to vaporize from ice to vapor, and that caused what's called the Great Flood, as in rain for 40 days and 40 nights, or maybe 40 years. But mounting scientific evidence is showing that the world's oceans rose by 300 plus feet or 100 meters very rapidly, and very rapidly meaning maybe in a year or less. This could have been what we call the flood. So rather than Atlantis being a landmass that sank, the waters rose and buried this ancient civilization and possibly others. Those that were able to escaped, those that were not able to perished, and those with advanced technology that were able to escape may have resettled in different areas, such as the highlands of Peru and Egypt. So solar plasma is so intense in terms of heat that it would vaporize anything where it struck. That means all organic life would be gone in a flash. All the plants, all the animals, all the knowledge. What would be left behind would be stone structures. And this is where we get into the curious structures beginning in Peru. You can see where my finger is. That is a basalt stone wall in the city of Cusco. Basalt is 7 out of 10 hardness, with 10 being diamond. If this was created by the Inca civilization, they only had bronze chisels with a hardness of 3.5. So you can't cut basalt at all with bronze. It'd be the equivalent of trying to cut down a tree with a plastic knife. It's impossible. It's not difficult, it's impossible. So this wall, for example, you can't fit a human hair in the joinery, and this wall is more than 3 feet thick, perfect from front to back and inside. This would be very difficult to achieve today. And then another structure, which is Inca. This is where we get into the Inca building on an older foundation. So here you see that 3/4 or 4/5 of the wall are actually adobe, which is a mix of clay, mud, and stone. And at the base, we have a basalt megalithic structure. So what we can say is that the Inca found the basalt structure and then built on top of it. Also nearby in Cusco, you see on the right side relative basalt rubble put together with clay mortar, and then on the left, perfect construction in basalt, no mortar, all the stones interlock. So here again, the Inca found the remains of a megalithic site, and they simply built on top of it. And this possibly shows the clearest evidence. On the right-hand side, the intact megalithic basalt wall. Then on the left-hand side below, where the Inca found some of the basalt blocks and put them back into place, then they ran out of material and had to find other stone in the area and fill it in. So there you have 3 different forms of construction, the superior one being on the right and the oldest. Then when we look at a topical map of the city of Cusco made by the first Spanish arrivals around 1535 AD, you see thick walls and thin walls. So this is right when the Spanish first enter Cusco, the first Europeans, and the map maker was able to distinguish the megalithic thick walls with the Inca thin walls. So this is before any colonial Spanish building was done. This by itself shows you that the Inca found an abandoned megalithic city and rebuilt it. And the very complicated polygonal work that we find in Cusco. Every stone a different shape and size, and these curious knobs protruding from the surface. This is not a logical way of building a wall from a European mindset because we would use uniform shapes and sizes. And so it's kind of an illogical way to do things, but what it shows us is someone had very advanced technology and was able to simply build this quite rapidly and have all the stone interlock, a feat that would be very difficult today. And again, evidence of an ancient construction technique and then a later Inca construction. This is the base of the wall, and then when we look higher up, you see that the Inca came and filled in using whatever stone they could find in the area. So superior below, inferior above. And this photo shows you how the Inca were trying to replicate the ancient style. They made the stone in the front fit perfectly together, but since this wall was destroyed, probably during Spanish colonial times, we can see the inside of the wall. And if you look very carefully, you can see the fitting is like this. You have perfect joinery in the front, but in the back it flares out. That's a relatively easy way to build a wall and make it look like it's complicated. As we wander around the city of Peru, we come to Sacsayhuaman. These stones are the largest ones ever cut and put into place in the Americas. These ones here average 20 to 25 tons, but there are stones at Sacsayhuaman that weigh 125 tons. There is one which is 29 feet tall, 12 feet of it is underground, 17 feet above ground. And then in the upper area, on the left and right, you see the smaller stones. That is Inca repair work, because the Spanish never did repairs at this location. It was a pagan site, they called, so they forbade any use by the Inca or their descendants of it ever since. So that makes it a time capsule. And this, in the Sacred Valley of Peru, is the winter palace of one of the highest of the Inca. And you can see this was made probably in the 15th century AD. You see the inferior style of construction, adobe mud and some blocks stuck together. A royal high Inca, if they were capable of making things in a polygonal and megalithic fashion, would have done so. But this shows they did not have that capability. And then also here, we're at Ollantaytambo, which is in the Sacred Valley of Peru. This is an Inca work. It's relatively crude, but it's large. These were grain storage areas and potato storage areas. It was built 1,000 feet above the valley floor, is huge, but the technology used was really quite simple. Stone and adobe and clay mud. But in the same location at Ollantaytambo, we have this construction. You have 6 granite blocks weighing 60 tons plus, still interlocking almost perfectly. And the quarry from which this granite, or actually porphyry, stone was taken is in the photograph on the left on the top of that mountain. That is across the valley. It's a great distance and an incredible feat for anyone to do. Another clue as to the inheritance by the Inca is when we walk around to the left-hand side and look at the wall. And here we see crude work on top, megalithic work on the bottom. So again, an Inca inheritance reconstructed. Now we're moving to the famous site of Machu Picchu. And Machu Picchu, most academics say, was 100% made by the Inca in the course of 25 years. The sheer scale of the complex would make it impossible to construct in that time period. And once again, we find anomalies. Here, the wall in front is very crude. The wall in the back, all of the stone interlocks perfectly. And this stone is granite with a hardness of 7 out of 10. The Inca were a Bronze Age people. Bronze cannot cut granite or any other hard stone. Then again, as we visit this location one more time, this has not been reconstructed. Look at the crudeness of the work on top as compared to below. The gaps in the giant blocks below were the result of a massive earthquake that likely happened at the time of the Cataclysm 12,000 years ago. And this is further emphasized by this three-sided structure where the right side has sunken into the ground by 2 feet or more, almost a liquefaction of the substrate. The wall has been pulled apart, and I was there with a geologist, and she said, if this much damage had happened to this megalithic structure, then the rest of Machu Picchu would be in complete ruins. So the Inca found this structure, could not rebuild it, and then built around it. They built their city around a megalithic core. Also at other locations, we have megalithic structures where, in this case, a multi-ton stone shaped and then simply snapped in half like it was styrofoam. So let's move now to Tiwanaku, which is located 13,000 feet above sea level near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. This stone is comprised of 2 different types of stone. One is red sandstone from a quarry about 8 miles away. Some of these blocks weighing 100 tons over a rolling landscape. And then the gray stone, which is called andesite, designated by the vertical pillars you see. It's from a quarry on top of a volcano more than 50 miles or 75 plus kilometers away. So at Tiwanaku, which also has a component called Pumapunku, so Tiwanaku and Pumapunku are actually the same location. They were all originally constructed at the same time. Tiwanaku was later inherited by what they call the Tiwanaku culture, and Pumapunku, which is a low-lying structure, was in fact buried by a wall of mud, likely 12,000 years ago, during the cataclysmic events. So here we find the famous H blocks, of which there are 8. Each one is a different shape and size. So there are some theories that the H blocks were created using molds, but each one is slightly different. So each one was crafted individually. And then we go to the excavations. So all of the excavation work done, especially recently at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, the archaeologists have only dug down 2 feet. And then when you ask them, why don't you dig deeper? Maybe there's more underground. They say no. We don't believe there's anything deeper than that. However, ground-penetrating radar done independently has shown there are chambers, quite large, underneath the ground at Tiwanaku and probably at Pumapunku. So this is an example of where academics probably know that there's much more to the history of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku, but they are simply ignoring the facts. Again, we have evidence of a massive cataclysmic event, a wall of mud striking Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, a tsunami that came from Lake Titicaca, burying aspects of it, and the precision, which you see in this photograph, would be impossible to have been done by a Bronze Age culture like the Tiwanaku, who were pre-Inca, but still did not have the tools to be able to shape this stone, because this andesite is 7 out of 10 in hardness, bronze is 3.5. These are almost laser flat surfaces. So at Pumapunku, all we see is geometry. All we see are angles. We don't see any artwork. We simply see precision, and we see pragmatic practicality. Recent studies here have shown that there are magnetic anomalies only with the gray andesite. The red sandstone is neutral to the compass, but especially what are called the H blocks, a compass will act very erratically when coming into contact with the surfaces of the andesite. In some cases, if you push the compass into the slot of one of the H blocks, it will turn by 270 degrees, and then when you pull it back out, it returns to the normal magnetic field. This is not the result of the simple nature of the stone having magnetic qualities, but there seems to be a direct relationship between the angles and surfaces and magnetism. So it could be that the cutting of the surfaces involved using magnetism, but we're still in our early phases of looking at this phenomenon, which most other researchers are not looking at whatsoever. Then we come to the giant sun gate, and the sun gate weighs about 11 tons. It was originally one piece of stone. The crack in the right-hand side likely happened during the ancient Cataclysm, and all the artwork on the surface was done by the Tiwanaku culture between 2,000 years ago and 1,000 years ago. So they found these flat surfaces and decided to adorn them with surface artwork. The lower surfaces are the original no art, flat surfaces. And during the time of the Spanish colonists, they found it upright but broken in half. And there's evidence that it had been lying on its front surface for thousands of years because the back side is heavily eroded, but the front side was preserved by the fact that it was in contact with the ground itself. So very little erosion, raised up by the Tiwanaku culture 2,000 to 1,000 years ago, carved, and then likely fell down again. And once again, academics are insisting that copper and bronze chisels were used to do all this work. And they also insist that all of the profound work done in ancient Egypt was also done up until the time of 700 BC using copper and bronze chisels. An example of this are these two boxes. The one on the right, they say, is from the 4th dynasty, and it's very rough, as you can see. It's made out of granite, no flat sides, covered in hieroglyphics, very crude, small. The one on the left, they say, is older, and you can see it's much bigger. It has flat surfaces. The lid was cut from the same piece of stone as the box. The inside is almost perfectly flat, and that would require a much higher level of technology than the making of the one on the right. So that's evidence by itself of technology of a more sophisticated nature that happened prior to the 4th dynasty. And then in the museum in Cairo, this is a giant box. Notice I'm not calling it a sarcophagus because these are much bigger than human size. And this is evidence of a mistake happening in the construction of this giant box. Two machines that turn out to be circular saws, the saws being 6 feet in diameter, one on top of the other, were working to cut the lid off, and the upper saw started to move into the box itself and snapped 1/3 of the lid off. So what they did is they simply abandoned the project. They didn't try to take the stone and cut it into smaller pieces. Obviously, their technology was so sophisticated that if they made a mistake, all they would say is, bring me another blank and I'll make another box. And here is the actual evidence. Here we see the tool marks. We see the two circular saws, the one on top shifting into the box, creating the snapping of the lid. And the cutting rate appears to be about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters per revolution. That is 500 times more efficient than a modern 21st century drill or saw. Also, anomalous artifacts such as this. The Egyptologists call this a vase for lotuses, but it looks much more like a piece of a machine. Here in profile, you see there are 3 lobes. Unfortunately, this was restored in modern times. Originally, it would have been technically perfect, but because they tried to fix it, they make it as though it's kind of rough. And so originally, this would be, as you can see by the central shaft, some kind of impeller device. Whether it pushed or pulled air or water or energy is unknown. If it was to pull or push, the lobes should be angled, but they are flat and curved. So this is a very out-of-place artifact, and the fact that it's still on display is quite amazing. And then we also see other mistakes that the academics have made. What we find in the museum are 100 or more vases, dishes, cylindrical jars, and vases with handles that are made out of porphyry, which is a stone of 7 out of 10 hardness or more, basalt and diorite, which are of a hardness of 7 out of 10, with 10 being diamond, and they are listed as being from the Archaic period. Archaic period means pre-dynastic, so older than 3000 BC, and that means they were made prior to the invention of the potter's wheel. And as we look at the artifacts, we see that they had to have been turned on lathes. Now lathes, as in lathes for, especially for cutting stone and metals, likely didn't exist prior to, say, the 17th or 18th century AD. And the cutting of hard stone like this would require diamond tools. So we're talking late 19th century AD. And yet, a cache of these objects was found at Saqqara, including the so-called schist disc, 30 to 40,000 of them, made during pre-dynastic times. And as you can see in this photo, they had to have been made using lathe machine technology. Also in the museum, we find core drills in granite. And again, the core drill, as far as we know, was not invented until the 19th century AD. So somebody had that technology in dynastic, or more likely, pre-dynastic times. Lost ancient high technology, lost ancient high civilization. Also the Great Pyramid, 2.3 million to 2.5 million multi-ton blocks. If this was done during the time of Khufu, the supposed creator, around 2500 BC, in a 25-year period, that means that each block would have to be cut, moved, and set into place almost perfectly every 2 minutes. That is impossible. We're talking the difference between difficult and impossible. We're getting more into the realm of impossible. Also, if you didn't know, the Great Pyramid is 8-sided, not 4-sided. So that makes the whole design and execution that much more difficult. And we find casing stone still intact on the Great Pyramid. If it was all removed by later cultures to build the city of Cairo, why are there some still attached to the bottom? I think it's because the Great Pyramid system, of which there were at least 8, were all made several thousand years prior to dynastic times. They were energetic structures, so they were amplifying energy, and during the great cataclysmic period of about 12,000 years ago, these structures over-energized, and the casing stone, which was like a skin, blew off the surface. And so over the course of time, they turned off in terms of their energetic function, and then later civilizations came and simply took the stone from the ground, moved it, and built structures. They didn't physically peel the casing stone off. Also, the Great Pyramid is locked into the Giza Plateau. It doesn't sit on top of it. So that's like it's interlocked into the plateau itself. And we know now for sure that there are a series of tunnels and shafts on the Giza Plateau. And this was probably part of the energetic nature of the Giza system. It's quite possible that underground water ran under the Giza Plateau in very confined and controlled tunnels, and that generated the piezoelectricity that was then amplified and collected inside the Great Pyramid system. Because I have been 4 levels underground on the Giza Plateau, and I'm told that there are at least 10 more levels below that. Here, on the backside of the Great Pyramid, are access shafts that go down to the tunnel system. Some of these were made or were used as tombs. They weren't made by the dynastic people, but the dynastic people found these open chambers and of course said, why should we make a tomb when we have one here to use already? And if you're able to, you can get to areas on the Giza Plateau where there are shafts that are at least 14 feet wide, 14 feet long, and 60 feet plus deep. They have sand on the bottom, but if these shafts in bedrock were created 12,000 plus years ago, that gave plenty of time for them to fill up to their current point of being 60 feet deep. They may be hundreds of feet deep. And now also on the Giza Plateau, evidence of saw marks. These are linear saws cutting into the basalt. And so this would have to be diamond level technology, and penetration rate is approximately 1 to 2 millimeters per cut. That is not something the ancient dynastic Egyptians had, something very difficult to do today. And also the curious nature of the acoustics and sounds inside the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid seems to respond to certain tones, and that could be telling us that the interior structure was tuned to specific frequencies. I believe that the Great Pyramids collected the sound or energy, more like vibration or energy, and then transmitted the energy to the great obelisks. Because the great obelisks were also not made during dynastic times because they're made of granite. And the dynastic people could not efficiently shape granite, and these weigh in the neighborhood some 400 tons. So it's like an ancient Wi-Fi or energetic system or Tesla technology. So on the Giza Plateau, you may not know that the Great Sphinx, it was not shaped by people chipping away at it in order to create the design. The Sphinx is in what's called the Sphinx enclosure, so it's actually in a recess, and the giant blocks in front were cut out from the Giza area and moved to the front in order to create what's called the Sphinx Temple. So blocks easily 40 tons or more. One is cut, removed from the enclosure, set into place. Another one is cut and moved right next to it. And you see the amount of erosion on the surface. That is much more than a few thousand years. And we can see the erosion. The face was recarved during dynastic times, obviously. And thanks to the work of Dr. Robert Schoch and 200 other geologists, we can see the vertical erosion which had to have happened using precipitation or rainwater. It has not rained significantly in the area of the Giza Plateau for at least 10,000 years. So that tells us that the dynastic people around 3100 BC found the Sphinx in place and started to reshape and repair it. Also, we see this ramp made of wood in front of the pause. There are legends that there are shafts or tunnels and or the so-called Hall of Records underneath the front paws of the Sphinx. And Robert Schoch did ground penetrating radar. They found at least one chamber in the bedrock under the Sphinx. And so I was told recently that the reason why this boardwalk was built is because they've already done excavations. They have found chambers underneath it, and they built the boardwalk system to hide the entrance to the shaft, tunnel, and chamber system. It's not done there for tourists. It's done there to hide the evidence. Also near the rump of the Sphinx, we have this grate, which on this day happened to have been removed from where it is. It's on the left hand of the rump of the Sphinx. And when it was removed by an official that was with us, we could see inside there's a metal ladder that goes down inside the Sphinx. So it's quite possible that the Sphinx is hollow or has a series of ancient tunnel and shaft systems built during the construction originally of the Sphinx. Also the bent pyramid, you see the damage to it. Again, it's my theory that it was a vibratory resonant structure, and that during the time of the ancient cataclysm, the surface or the corners blew out. And also notice the two angles. The upper angle was more affected by this cataclysm than the lower angle. This was not simply people coming and ripping pieces off. They simply harvested what was found on the ground. Also, the red pyramid, all the casing stone has been reduced to rubble. So I think the casing stone blew off the surface of the red pyramid. Inside these structures, again, astonishing acoustics, giving evidence of acoustic and resonance properties inherent with its construction. If they were built as tombs, why would you make them harmonic inside? That makes no sense. Then we come to Saqqara. And at Saqqara, we have a series of two tunnels. And in these tunnels, we have boxes weighing 100 tons apiece. So here, in one tunnel, we have a box that was never actually completed, which is curious. But there are 25 plus of these giant boxes. The box itself weighs 70 tons. The lid weighs 30 tons. The lid hermetically seals the box, and the stone is syenite or maybe granite. They're both related stones. The stone likely came from Aswan, which is 500 miles away, and the carving on the surface is very inferior to the shaping of the boxes themselves. You can see the quality of workmanship. Again, it appears that the box and lid would hermetically seal each other. So these are not the tombs of the pharaohs. These are not the tombs of bulls, because this is way beyond the technology of any stage during dynastic Egypt. And the hieroglyphs. The hieroglyphs were actually never completed, and they're very crude in nature, as if somebody was carving them with a hardened nail, whereas the construction of the boxes could not be achieved to this very day. And inside, almost perfect construction. Again, you see the quality of work of the lid and the acoustics and vibration of the inside. The boxes were tuned to a very specific frequency that could have been ohm. So they were vibratory structures, like the pyramids. The oldest astrological calendars supposedly are in Egypt. Some say they date to about 12,000 years ago, or that the whole concept of astrology came up after the Great Cataclysm, that the skies were studied not out of fascination, but out of fear of something else coming in to destroy the earth. Then, of course, we find the curious helicopter, tank, and submarine. You only find these in one area of glyphs at Abydos. I honestly don't know to this day whether they depict machines or not. They are curious. And next we go to the Osirion. Here you see the shape and scale. Granite vertical blocks from Aswan again, likely weighing 60 or plus tons. The lintels weighing 40 plus tons. The enclosure is made of quartzite, which comes from a mountain near Cairo. So again, quartzite from Cairo, that's moving stone hundreds of miles. The granite from Aswan, hundreds of miles. The whole construction was done underground. This was clearly found by the dynastic Egyptians and much, much later by Egyptologists. Cataclysmic destruction, later cutting of stone for other structures. We have evidence of tube drills. In this case, the diameter is approximately that big. As far as we know, tube drills of that size could not have been created until at least the 20th century AD, but we find them in profusion in different sites in ancient Egypt. We also find strange damage to some of the obelisks. The geologist that was with us looked at this and said the stone had to have been struck with intense heat, almost instantaneous blasts of heat of 2,000 plus degrees Celsius. And she said the evidence for that is that the crystalline nature of the interior of the stone is different to the outside. So the inside of the stone expanded, was almost heat flashed or cooked, not to the point of melting, but to the point of causing the stone to expand, creating major cracks on the surface. And now instead of the obelisk having a tune sound, which is what you find with a true obelisk, there's a dead thud. So this is possible evidence of ancient cataclysmic heat. We find a lot of that at Karnak. The surface is basically burnt right off of some of the obelisks and other structures. And especially here, that's what's called the Holy of Holies. So this is actually supposed to be perfectly east-west, and in fact, it's 23 degrees off where it should be. That again could be the planet shifting in its axis 12,000 plus years ago. And these giant statues that have been found, they're dedicated to Ramses II, but in fact, all of them were found buried underground. And some of the precision of the cutting that we see of these faces could not have been done by hand, but it's like a computerized machine went in and cut one side, then reversed and cut the other side. This is 21st century AD technology. The Colossi of Memnon. This is made of 2 pieces of stone. The seated figure is 1 piece of stone weighing 720 tons. The base is about 300 tons. The quarry is in Cairo, about 200 or more, I'm being conservative, miles away. And you see the surface, the front, confirmed by a geologist, the front surface is burnt off. This is not the damage of vandals, but the front is burnt off, the sides are less damaged, and the back is not damaged at all. So this is a heat blast coming in from the east, likely at sunrise. Also, we have what's left of a 1,000-ton sculpture. It was all one piece, blown to pieces, and we see heat scorching on the backside. So that means this figure was actually facing, sorry, I got that backwards. The heat scorching is on the back, so the face was facing into the Valley of the Kings. This force came and blew it to pieces, and it's strewn all over. Also, it's very likely that the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens, that the shaft system, that they were created during pre-dynastic times, and that then the dynastic people simply used them as tombs because they found them there already. And there is evidence that the Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens actually are one system underground, that they interconnect, interlock. So that means that this, what you're looking at in the Valley of the Queens, goes underneath the mountain in the background and connects with the Valley of the Kings. This could not have been done by the dynastic people. And just other large stone granite structures we find that could not have been done by the dynastic people. Sense of scale, sense of quality of workmanship. The 1,200-ton unfinished obelisk at Aswan that was never completed. It looks like work suddenly stopped there one day for unknown reasons. I think it was a cataclysm. And what we also see is this large horizontal crack. The horizontal surface of the obelisk was done to proportions. Then as they were cutting down, they reached a point, they had to go deeper, but they reached a point where they found this crack. They abandoned the project. Also, there was another smaller obelisk. And you see these strange cutting marks that appear to be some kind of machine clawing at the granite to cut it. This could not have been done by hand tools. And another location in the Nile Delta called Tanis. So Tanis is surrounded by farmland. The Nile Delta is incredibly firm. It's the breadbasket of Egypt. So you drive 2 miles through beautiful farmland, and then you reach this hill, which is basically devoid of life. The surface of the material, again, you have beautiful soil and agriculture just next to it. And then the soil at Tanis has the consistency of flour. As you walk the surface of Tanis, it's like you're walking on the moon. Again, as if massive heat had struck the site. And huge blocks blown to pieces. This is mainly granite, and granite is from 1,000 kilometers away, again, at Aswan. Here you see evidence on the right-hand side of heat scorching of quartzite stone. So in the case of quartzite, it actually changes color and melts when you apply high heat rapidly to it, whereas with granite, granite will simply crumble and break. So it depends on the type of stone. The ancient dynastic Egyptians found this location and they rebuilt it. So you see the rather crude work done with the megalithic blocks that they found. But again, more and more we find heat scorching. This is quartzite. It should be that light color on the left, as you can see, where that person's hand is, but the discoloration is heat. And then here we find what's left of a foot. And this was reshaped, the toes were cut off during dynastic times, most likely to be incorporated into a building. But it's calculated that if this was from a sculpture of one piece, that sculpture would be more than 100 feet tall. One piece, more than 100 feet tall, the quarry being at Aswan, more than 1,000 kilometers to the south. The lid of a giant box located at Tanis. A sculpture, you can see when you look at the toes, the discoloration is the melting of the surface. And here too with this sculpture, you see the surface is crumbling away because it has been destabilized by very intense heat. Almost all of the work found at Tanis, such as these sculptures, etc., they were all found buried underground, as if a giant heat source had come, struck it, caused all the soil to blow up into the atmosphere, more or less, in huge quantities, and then settled back down, covering what was there. More discoloration. And then finally, we're going into the Osiris shaft. The Osiris shaft has been closed off to the general public, most likely almost forever, or at least in recorded history. Less than 2 years ago, the government decided to open it up for tourism. It takes a special permit to go there, But if you pay the fee, your group can go inside. And it, by itself, if there was only the Osiris shaft, you would see clear evidence of lost ancient high technology. And so we were very fortunate to have it to ourselves for about an hour, actually 2 hours. So here is how you enter. You enter under the passageway that leads to the second pyramid. So you enter sideways, and then when you look down, first you look up and you see that this is in fact the bedrock with metal grates over top. And then you look down, and you're looking down 30 feet into the bedrock. So you take a ladder, a metal ladder, and you go down to the first level underground, as seen here. And you're inside this room. It's about 15 feet wide and 30 feet long. In the bedrock, you go forward, you look down, and there is a shaft that goes down another 100 feet. And in there are 6 chambers. And there are 2 boxes between 40 and 60 tons each. And they show signs of internal damage, as though there had been an explosion of some kind in the second level. It seems to be an internal explosion, not a force from the outside. And this one, the lid is ajar, and there's a strange organic material which is inside the box, and no one knows what that is. But again, it's only been open to the general public for less than 2 years. And this shows you the strange nature of whatever this substance is. So finally you look down another 60 feet, and at the bottom is a pool of crystal clear water. And this gentleman is standing on top of a granite or syenite box that weighs between 60 and 80 tons. So how did they get the box down through those 4 levels? How did they move the stone of the box from the Aswan quarry 500 miles away? And what was this? Again, they call it the symbolic tomb of Osiris, but they don't have any explanation as to who made it or how it was made. And that's what this entire talk has been about. It's about cultures such as the Inca and the dynastic Egyptians creating all these structures during the known history as we understand it. But clearly what you've seen from the evidence is that many of these were found by these people as remnants of constructions done by lost ancient civilizations in what we call prehistory, utilizing lost ancient high technology.